General Norman Schwarzkopf was recently interviewed, and he was asked an intriguing question. He was asked, what was going through your mind moments before or moments during the time that you were to order the bombing of Kuwait during the Gulf War several years ago? Schwarzkopf did not have to think very long, and he almost immediately responded by saying, I can tell you what was going through my mind. I was thinking that my whole life, my whole training had taken place to prepare me for a moment just like this. An amazing insight. An awesome moment. To stand at the crossroads and realize that all of your training, all the experiences that you've had, everything that has been occurring in your life, from your heritage right on, and even in your military training, for him at least, that everything had occurred to prepare him for a moment just like that. An amazing moment. He understood something. He understood that that heritage of training had indeed worked all for that moment. You come to the life of Joseph. You can't help but say Joseph was prepared for a moment just like this. The experiences that he has, the ups and downs that he has spiritually, although we're not recorded with everything, but that we can, I think, safely surmise. The events of going from the comfortableness of his father's house in Canaan and winding up in a pit in Egypt, and that taking him then to the rulership of Potiphar's household, but that would take him down again to the very pit of a prison again, and then out of the prison he would be elevated to, eventually to, the premiership of all of Egypt, second in command and practically the most in command on a daily basis. How does God take a young 17-year-old Jewish boy who, as we will see this morning, whose character was rather rough, was rather prideful, was rather arrogant, and how does God take a young 17-year-old man and shape him through the experiences of his life by God's providential hand and prepare him for the moments of exaltation? For the moments that would eventually, years later, even after Joseph was gone, lead those people out of Egypt and into that area of history that's come to know that promised land experience of Israel, that set the stage, if you will, for the coming of the Messiah that had already been set but was cultivated through even the events of Israel's captivity in Egypt. How does God do that? What do we see as we discover that God develops the character and personality of Joseph to be and to do what God has designed him to be and to do? That's what I want us to see over these next few weeks. What does God do to Joseph that he also does to us? That we also see in our own life, because many of us are really no different than Joseph. You see, what affected Joseph's life was this heritage that had come before him. Joseph got to be 17-year-old in that household with his character and his personality, not by accident, but by a plan and by things that had occurred and by things that were happening in the life of Joseph's existence. Now, I want to give you at least two characteristics or two themes that are going to be running through this series of sermons. Because what we're going to be focusing on, and we could focus on a lot of different things in the life of Joseph, but we're specifically going to be focusing on two aspects, and that is, how does God develop character in our life? As an example, through the life of Joseph. And how do we see the providential hand of God, God's providence in our life, as we see an example in the life of Joseph? So character on our end and providence on God's end are going to be the two characteristics that are going to be prevalent, and we're going to say those two words. You're going to hear those two words over and over and over again in the next 10 weeks. To understand how God indeed develops our character and our personality through his providence. And I hope that you will be as excited as I have been as I have looked a little bit and will look even more into this great life of the example of Joseph. Let me give you some general thoughts on the foundations of character as we introduce this series this morning. To understand Joseph, you've got to understand the character of his own family heritage. Let me give you a statement. You see, for Joseph, his character and his personality are learned. He learns his character. He learns his personality through his parental heritage, through what is happening in the life of Jacob, for what has happened in the life of Isaac. That Joseph's character and Joseph's personality is a learned attribute in his life. Now you say for a moment, well, I thought personality is something that just God gave you and we're supposed to develop it. Well, that's temperament. Now, I'm not a psychologist, and I should have talked to some of you who are this morning because, you correct me afterwards. Or maybe you don't need to correct me, but nevertheless. But temperament seems to be, as I just looked up that word temperament in a common dictionary, listen to this. Temperament is the physical and mental qualities peculiar to an individual. Temperament is indeed that innateness that God has put into your life. Those peculiar physical and mental qualities that God has given to you as an individual. That's your temperament. That's how God has made you to be. But we come this morning to the issue of character, and listen to this definition of character. Character is the moral force of integrity expressed in the manner of a person as that person relates to the issues of his life or her life. Let me just give it to you again. Character is the moral force of integrity expressed in the manner of that person as that person relates to the circumstances, to the issues that they experience. And that expression, if you will, and that manner, if you will, in relationship to what they experience is indeed their personality. You see it? Character, I believe, and personality go hand in hand. You can't separate it. Personality is an outflow, is an expression of that moral force of integrity of your life, which is your character. Now, of course, that's going to stem and it's going to be battled out and developed through the temperament that God has given to you. You can be outward or you can be very reserved or whatever it might be, but it doesn't really matter. Out of that, God is going to build a character that needs to be a biblical character and a personality that needs to be a biblical personality. None of us this morning can say, well, it's just not my personality to love everybody. No, because that is a character that God has said is biblical and a personality trait that is biblical. And whether or not that might be your temperament or not, it needs to be developed into a character and a personality. Do you see it? We blame a lot on God, don't we? And we say, I don't need to do this and I don't have to do this because, well, God just haven't made me that way. Well, maybe he hasn't in some respects. But the call is to the character of development. And that is really what I want to throw in here in the middle of all this morning. That is the arena, I believe, of parenting. And maybe I'm going to talk a little bit this morning about parenting. I am not an expert on it. Many of you have got many more years of heritage in this area. I mean, I have 8 years and at the most, right? That's nothing. I'm learning. And Bob Barnes came several weeks ago, and boy, that was a fantastic thing. And I just long for the day that I can just gain a little bit of half a fraction of the insight that Bob Barnes has about parenting. But I know this much about parenting, as I'm sure that you know, is that is our responsibility of parents, to place parameters and to provide an atmosphere so that God may develop the character of our children and the personality of our children within the biblical frameworks. And you and I are responsible before God to our children to develop the parameters, if you will, to place them in the atmosphere as much as God will lead us and much as God will empower us to do, so that our children will not become but learn a biblical character and a biblical personality. Do you follow me there? Now, what does this have to do with Joseph? It has everything to do with Joseph. You know why? Because Joseph learned his character. Joseph learned his personality. And he did it within the framework of a family heritage. And that's what I want us to see this morning. It's not going to be all complimentary. Because let's face it, we come to Joseph, let me just say this to you. I have felt a little heretical this week. let me define that before you walk out and start telling everybody. I grew up in Sunday school, of course, and I grew up hearing the life of Joseph, and I just grew up hearing, isn't this great? This neat guy, 17 years old, loved God, and he just was in a wonderful Christian family, and he got this fantastic coat. And wasn't that great of God to do that? And I grew with all these positive things about Joseph. Now, I don't want to be too heretical. Joseph is positive. But as I begin to look at Jacob, as I begin to look at Joseph at 17 years old, I'm thinking, this isn't so positive. He's not such a neat guy when he starts off. This is pretty offensive if I was his brothers. He's pretty arrogant, flaunting that coat around all the time. That coat's not as neat as we think it is. We come to Joseph, and to understand Joseph and how God develops him, we've got to understand his parental heritage. Let's look at this overview just for a few moments. So get a handle historically of what's happening here and the whole scheme of the pilgrimage of Joseph's life. The thoughts above, of course, are key into Joseph's life about character, about parenting, and what happens. Now, you talk about dysfunctional. You talk about a dysfunctional family. You've got it in Jacob and Joseph and those 12 boys of his. And the women who lived there, but whom Jacob didn't love. A lot of people, that's the popular word today, isn't it? Just dysfunctional. A lot of money's been made off of that word, which I want to just tell you, I think we're all dysfunctional. You know, I just think there's just a lot of dysfunction in all of our lives, and somebody's made a lot of money by trying to define it, but I'm not sure you can. I think it's just a byproduct of being sinful. Okay, so we're all on the same boat. We're like Jacob and Joseph. We're dysfunctional. We get this out of the way, we'll be all right. The home is filled with tension. You don't read a page from about Genesis 29 on to about Genesis 37. You don't read a page without tension, without some sort of dysfunctional relationship before Joseph's birth and after Joseph's birth. Jacob, as you will perhaps remember from the history, Jacob marries Leah. He didn't love her. He didn't want to marry her. He was sort of roped into this by Laban, his father-in-law. But he went ahead and married her because that was the key, he found out later, to finding the real emphasis in marrying Rachel, whom he really did love. And so Laban allows him to go ahead and marry her, but yet with a promise to work 7 more years. You remember that story? There was a problem, however. The woman that Jacob loves didn't bear him children. Or the one that he didn't love, rather, did bear him children. You follow me? 6 sons at first, and 1 daughter by the name of Dinah. In his attempt to get more children, but he couldn't get them through Rachel, he is given these concubines or maidservants, Bilhah and Zilpah. They give him 4 more sons. He has 10 sons now, and 1 daughter from women he doesn't love. Do you understand that? And there's got to be some tension there as he was relating to those 10 boys and to that 1 daughter. I can't imagine the dynamics that are taking place. And finally, God gives him a child through Rachel, the one that he does love and has his heart set on. She gives birth to a son. They call him Joseph. In the Hebrew, that word Joseph is a word that means adding to. And so she says after he's born, may the Lord add to my number. Can you imagine your naming your son Adding? That's Joseph. And then the move. You remember the move, and we'll come back to the particulars there in Genesis 34 in just a few moments about the move from Laban. He gets out underneath this indentured servant role that he's playing to gain this family heritage that he has, and he moves on to Canaan. And on the process of going on to Canaan, his wife Rachel has another son named Benjamin, Ben-Omi in the Hebrew. And that word means the Lord is adding trouble to me. There's a stress in my life. And how is that particular? Because of the birth, as she gave birth to Benjamin, she dies in childbirth. Now get the point. Now you've got Jacob, 12 sons, an infant at that, 1 daughter. And his wife, the woman that he loves, is dead. And he alone, practically, although he's got He's got his other Leah, and he's got the Zilpah and Bilhah all along there, but they're not playing a key dynamic role in his parenting, I guarantee you that. And he almost alone, single-handedly, as a single father, a single parent, is raising these 12 sons and this one daughter. And Jacob is left. You talk about problems. Do you understand the atmosphere this young boy Joseph is raised in? And then, of course, you understand at 17 years old in Genesis 37, Joseph's character is very rough. Let me just say it nicely. I think it's prideful at the best. It's self-promoting. He's manipulative. You know, he's going and tattletelling on his brothers to make him look good. The coat is not so neat. He prances around in it. And let me tell you something. The exciting thing of it is, Genesis 37 through Genesis 50 is the story of how God breaks and then molds the character and personality of a man who will stand for him. That's what those chapters are going to be about. Some of us today need to be broken. Some of us today need to be broken before him in our character and our personality so that God may remold it, reconstruct it by his providential hand to be used by him. Some of us are parents here today, and we are called to participate in that providential plan in our children's lives, to allow God to use us to break and to mold those children. Now, I think in some respects, Jacob kind of missed the boat. And I want us to see some things that he models for us, Jacob. You see, because what I want us to see this morning are 4 prominent themes from parental heritage in molding character. And it's going to be a look at Joseph through Jacob. To understand this process that has to take place, to take us out of this context and moving on to the end of the life of Joseph, we've got to understand Jacob. Because if we understand Jacob, then we understand what God had to deal with in Joseph. You following me? So let's start with it. Jacob, number 1, modeled promoting self over a determination to humility of character. Jacob modeled and promoted himself over a determination of humility of character. Now, we're going to have to breeze through some of this, but I want you to go back and I want you to look at it. I want you just to get a feel. The purpose right now is not to plan out every single detail of his life. I want you to get an understanding. The theme runs deep, this theme of self-promotion in Jacob's life, as it will in Joseph's life. Isaac had been a favored son from the very beginning, his father. It was no wonder then that when Isaac married Rebekah, that there became this favored son relationship. And it was due largely to the fact of Rebekah, who was this strong-willed woman in the home of Isaac. And Rebekah sets her sights on Jacob, her son. And remember, Jacob's name means what? Deceiver. And with the help of Rebekah, his mother, he's able to manipulate his brother and steal the birthright. And he's able to lie and manipulate the father, Isaac, and to steal the blessing of God. You remember that, don't you? And Jacob grows with this sort of passive father, Isaac, who has been swindled out of blessings, this estranged brother, and this domineering mother. And as a result, and as an adult, we see it happen in Jacob's life as well. The pattern doesn't change. He comes to the situation with Laban, and you remember this event. He works 14 years. You'll find this in Genesis chapter 30 and Genesis chapter 31. He works 14 years for Rachel, and perhaps a few years after that. He has gathered lots of crops, he has gathered lots of animals and lots of livestock to his purse, and he is ready to go back to Canaan. He wants to get out of there. He wants to leave Laban. He's tired of this indentured servant role that he's been playing. And so he provides this plan. He said, listen, Laban, you're my father-in-law. I want to leave home. And Laban is agreeable to it. And here was the plan. Joseph says, I will take every speckled and spotted goat, and I will take every black sheep, and all those that are among our flocks together, those that fit that description, I'll take them for myself. And Laban said, well, sounds like a good plan to me. And so he took that plan. And Laban on the side starts swindling with his other sons, and he says, listen, you go through the herds before Jacob gets a hold of them, and you get out every speckled goat and every spotted goat, and you get out all the black sheep, and you hide them and put them aside, and when Jacob comes through, he won't see them. Well, Jacob kind of played along with it. I think he knew what was going on. So Jacob believed in this theory, this historical myth that was going on at the time, that whatever was before an animal, as it was breeding, the embryo of that small infant animal in them would be affected by the image. Sounds crazy, doesn't it? But as I looked in history, that was a common adopted viewpoint. And so Jacob says, well, I know they're going to breed when they come up for watering and they come up to feed. And so I'm going to get the limbs of the trees around, and I'm going to peel off so they look striped and spotted. And I'm going to have some of it where it has a dark background so that the sheep will produce dark sheep. See? Now this sounds almost ridiculous. But what I want you to see is that even God can take the ridiculous of man and use it in the providence of his name. You see it? Now it wasn't obviously the branches that made all this occur, because what happened was there was a lot of new little infant goats and infant sheep being born, and they were spotted and speckled and black. And of course Jacob's delighted because he says, the theory works, you know. But of course the providential hand of God was allowing it to work. It wasn't that. God was allowing it for another reason. Jacob gets a lot of self-confidence, and he heads out, but he sneaks out because he's afraid of Laban. He sneaks out, and his wife Rachel steals all the household gods from Laban, and he heads out to build his own land. And Laban catches up with him and sort of somewhat mends the relationship, so to speak. But there's a lot of jealousy. There's a lot of dishonesty. Jacob might have left with a lot of resources and gone on to Canaan, but he left with his reputation as a promoter very well made. His daughter Dinah is later raped in chapter 34. And he's really not too upset about it until he realizes that it's going to affect his reputation. And so he's upset over the rape of his daughter because he's afraid his name will be scarred. And then will you notice it in chapter 37? This self-promoter is still at it again because he hears the dreams, and he's really not too upset until it affects him. Do you see that? When he's brought into the picture, when the sun and the moon represents he and his wife bowing down to his son, that's when Jacob gets upset. As long as it only affected the boys, he wasn't too upset about it. Do you see that in the context? And the whole aspect of this theme of God, of seeing him self-promote himself. You see, God positions us for blessing in humility. God positions our character in our humility of not promotion of ourselves, but in trusting in his timing, in his agenda, and resting our reputation in God. How much of your energy is given throughout the week, throughout the day, in your job, in your neighborhood, in the civic responsibilities that you might have, in the promotion of yourself? And all the while it seems to be a good thing, and it looks like it's very pious out towards other people, but in your heart you know that you're playing it because you get from it. I'm not asking you even to admit that this morning, but I know that's an issue for our hearts because we're human. I face it, you face it, we all do. The question that comes to my mind this morning that we need to approach is that what are we displaying in our character and our personality, especially among our children? Are we expressing humility in life? I'm not talking about being run over. I'm not talking about taking the back seat all the time. I'm talking the balance of humility over self-promotion. Do you admit when you're wrong? Do your kids see you admit when you've been wrong within the family? Do they see you, mother, manipulating your husband, or father manipulating your wife? Or do they see you serving, loving, caring for that mother or father? Do we dominate our children? Do we boss them around because it fits our schedule? Do they see me handling blame the way God would handle blame and admit to it? You see my point? You see, God is going to shape the character and the personality of those people that God has positioned us to have and our influence in life through the character that we send forth to them. And Jacob was a self-promoter. No wonder Joseph starts off at 17 years old, flaunting that coat and telling dreams of superiority. Where had he learned self-promotion from Jacob? Where had Jacob learned it? From Isaac and Rebekah, his parents? Do you see it? You see how important parental influence is? And Jacob displays that. I know we all face that. Do we talk about our work in front of our kids around the supper table and badmouth our boss because he didn't meet our agenda? Do we argue about the raise that we didn't get and that we should have and deserved? Do we speed by the guy who bumps us on the freeway? You know what I'm talking about? The guy that pulls out in front of us. Do these kids see me speeding up and running around him and giving them the look, you know? You don't have to answer that. And we might say those are innocent things, and maybe sometimes it is. I'm not trying to lay a guilt trip on us. I'm just simply saying that those things communicate a character. And they will learn a character that Dad is more interested in beating this guy out on 95. And then that's a real thrust for him. And don't be surprised if your son is picked up with a speeding ticket because he did the same thing when he's 17. Where did he learn it? You see my point? I coming back from one of the soccer games, last soccer game, and Thursday night, and we lost. And Trevor did score a goal, but we lost. And I found myself complaining. Well, we wouldn't have lost if that referee hadn't have done that. And isn't that a shame? I was kind of going off on it all, and I realized, man, I'm preaching on this Sunday, and now I'm failing at it. What is Trevor learning? What is Trevor learning? Yesterday, I tell you, it was a real test, and God, I think, brought us through the test of our church to be able to reach out to another church. You realize how humbling it is for a pastor to invite somebody else to another church? Do you realize that? And you find yourself, man, I'm inviting all these people to go to some other church tomorrow morning. Now, how do you like that for church growth statistics? You know? And what is God doing among us? He is showing us that ministry is not promotion of ministry. What is it about? It's about humility of what God is doing in the kingdom. That's what He's teaching us. That's how we've been blessed, among the many other ways. Where do you stand? Joseph learned it. Jacob also modeled protection of self over a desire to trust in the providence of God. Jacob modeled a protection of self over a desire to trust in the providence of God. Because of this character of self-promotion, his life was about self-protection, of course. And he gave, although he gave this credit back to God for the livestock being blessed to him, he does piously. You read that there in chapter 31 or 32 of Genesis. He gives God the credit for all this produce that he's got in his life. But you come to chapter 32, and it's amazing. He's faced with meeting his brother Esau. Now, they had been estranged for years, remember? Esau heads out when the blessing is robbed from him, and he prepares to meet Esau. And what does he do? The Bible says in verse 7 of chapter 32, it says, in great fear and distress, Jacob responds to the scout who went out and found out that that Esau is on his way, and he has 400 men with him. And immediately, what's going through Jacob's mind? He's come to tear me to pieces. He's come to get revenge. And so he starts preparing his military up for all this thing, you know. Now, he had just given God credit for blessing. And now he comes to this point of meeting his estranged brother, and 400 men are coming, and he thinks all of a sudden, I got to do something to protect me. And he gets all the military up that he has, and he gets them all out front. And then you notice what he does. He sends out gifts. Now, that's a good thing to do. He tries to buy them off. He gives all these gifts out there. And over in verse 20 of Genesis 32, Esau says to him, why have you brought all these things? And he says, your servant Jacob is coming behind us, for he thought, I will pacify him with these gifts I am sending on ahead later when I see him. See, he wants to butter him up. He sends out all his servants to do all the dirty work, And he says, by the time I get there, he'll be happy. He'll be even more rich than what he was. He's got all these things, you see, and he'll be kind of scared off because the scouts kind of told him how many people I've got. And so then everything will be fine. What is he doing? Pacifying, protecting himself, forgetting about the providential hand of God that he just moments before had given credit to. His life was about self-promotion, so it naturally would be about self-protection and not trust. Oh, he later on trusts God. That was after he met Esau and realized that Esau wasn't up to anything. And then he says, oh, seeing your face is like seeing the face of God. You know? Oh, sure he's able to say that after he's protected himself, after he's gotten a guarantee that he's not going to be beat out by his brother. It's not trust there. The question is, do my boys see trust in my life? Do my boys see the character and personality of trusting God in the midst of circumstances that are adverse to my character, adverse to my temperament? Do they see me trusting God in the loss of a job or a financial need? Do they see me trusting God in the life situations? Or do they see the fear and the distress and the manipulation to protect myself? Or they see me placing my trust in a holy God who takes me beyond the moment because he's providential and he has it all in his hands. Not an inactivity now. I'm not talking about inactive. But does he see trust? It's okay to be filled with distress and fear as long as that distress and fear leads you to hope and doesn't leave you destitute of God. But do they see trust in your life? You know, it comes in little ways. It really does. This parental aspect that you and I are called to do, it doesn't have to be the big crisis. It just comes in little ways that God brings us opportunities to display trust in him, and so we teach that to the people that are around us, whether it be our children or nobody or other people around us. You remember Karen, the baptized turtle? Remember her? Do you? Well, I remember her. And we lost Karen the other day. Now wait just a minute. Now wait. We thought we lost her. Boys took her for a walk. Now, this is kind of strange, I know, behavior. But the boys let her out and took her for a walk, and they got to playing with her friends, and we lost Karen in the yard someplace. And they were pretty upset. You know, and I figured, well, if I baptize her, I can pray about it. I don't know. And I just said, Lord, you know, what a great moment this would be. That we can get, I can say to my boys, all right, let's pray and ask Jesus to help us find Karen. Let's pray. Let's ask God to help us do this. You know, this is a real, it was elementary, but they're going to see trust. And so we just, we asked God to help us find Karen. And pretty soon, Linda's mother was out in the yard looking, and we found Karen. Tucked under a bush. She was trying to get away from everybody, I'm sure. She doesn't want to live in this house anymore. But we found her, and it was a great testimony, you see. I thought it was. Now, maybe you think, now that is just really stupid. But now, to me, it was good. But they were able to see putting their trust in a God in the midst of their broken heart. They had lost their pet. And of course now, the comment around our house is that Karen once was lost, but now is found. So she is truly a covenant turtle. How is God doing that in your life? Just throw it out there, Father. Let them see the fear in you. Let them see that you're scared to death, that you don't know how you're going to meet this need for the family. Let them see it. But on the other hand, let them see that you're also calling them together to get on the rock of Jesus Christ, and that you're trusting him beyond your fear and beyond your distress. You see, that's the character that Joseph never learned. He saw a father that was into protection, into making it happen. The third thing is that Jacob modeled a partiality over the depth of unconditional love. He modeled partiality over the depth of unconditional love. Jacob was the product of partial love. He saw it modeled in Rebekah, his mother. He expressed it between Rachel and Leah. again and again in chapter 33. You see this event. He's going out to meet his brother now. Same event, same circumstance. Esau's waiting. What does he do? He takes his maidservants. He puts them up front. He takes Leah and her family, her 10 boys, or her 6 boys and 1 daughter, and places them second in line. He takes Rachel and Joseph and Benjamin, puts them in the back. And you think, well, that's just sort of a way he wanted to do it. No, I think it was by design. There's a real hierarchy of partiality here. Do you see it? Jacob is favoring. Jacob is showing a partial love. What do you think Joseph learned it? It's carried over into his own children. Notice back in chapter 37, we read it this morning. What happens is, it's noted for us. They noticed it. The boys noticed it. He loved Joseph more than them. And they hated who? Not Jacob, but Joseph. Well, I think they hated Jacob too. I think that's what this whole thing's about by throwing him into the pit. It's out to get Jacob, the father, not Joseph. Well, you see, there's a partial love they're learning. The brothers learned it. You know how I know the brothers learned it? Because in chapter 37, verse 32, when they come back and they tell Jacob about Joseph being gone and in the pit and being torn up by animals, what do they say? They say, examine it to see whether it is your, what? Son's robe. Not my brother's robe, but your son's robe. You see it? They had learned a partial love too. The point is simple. It's obvious. Will our children see unconditional love in our homes? Will our children learn how to love unconditionally in our homes? Will our children learn how to love beyond cultural and racial boundaries because they see we love beyond cultural and racial boundaries? Will our children love that they only get praise when they make A's in school or when they win the game? Will they understand that the only way that I'm going to get attention from Dad is when I really accomplish something? And I'll guarantee you, they might be 8 now, but at 48, they'll still be doing it, trying to please you. If you don't teach them unconditional love right now by modeling it. No hierarchies in the family. No manipulative actions, but the love. Been ministering to the Kelly family. Ralph Kelly, one of our dear brothers, is very near death. Very near death. Talked to his wife yesterday. I talked to him yesterday morning, spent time with him in the hospital, and was talking to Melrose, and she said, you know, our son is over from Tampa visiting with us, and Ralph said to his son, said, son, I wish I could have given you more. Wish I could have given you more. His son said, oh, Dad, you gave me everything important. You taught me how to love my wife. I saw how you loved my mom. That's how I love my wife. That's amazing, isn't it? Talk about heritage. Talk about wealth. Talk about what you're leaving behind in teaching. You see, Jacob didn't do that with Joseph. And then the last thing is this. Jacob modeled a passiveness over the demand to deal with sin personally and publicly. You've got it written down. Jacob modeled a passiveness over a demand to deal with sin personally and publicly. Let me just give it to you. You need to go back and read Genesis chapter 34. I want to encourage you to do that this afternoon. Read Genesis 34. You see an amazing story. I've just got to summarize it for you this morning. They're in the land of the Hivites. And they're coming out to Canaan, and there's a man by the name of Shechem. Shechem takes notice of Jacob's 1 daughter, Dinah. And he pulls her under himself, and he has this affair with her, and he rapes her. And they're pretty upset about it. But you see what happens is that in chapter 34, listen to what it says. When Jacob heard that his daughter Dinah had been defiled, his sons were in the fields with his livestock, so he kept quiet about it until they came home. And so he never dealt with it. His brothers find out about it, and his brothers design this scheme of revenge. And they go to Shechem and says, you know, we want to unite with you guys, and so if you want to become Jews with us, you've got to be circumcised. And so Shechem says, that's okay, we'll build an alliance, this will be good for all of us. and the men were circumcised. And while the men was recovering from being circumcised, 3 days into their pain, the Bible says, the sons of Jacob go down and kill them all because they couldn't defend themselves. And they got revenge for their sister Dinah. Why were they so captivated in getting revenge? I think because their father didn't deal with the sin. That doesn't blame it. That's not blaming Jacob for their sin. And then when Jacob finds out about their sin, what does the Bible say? The Bible says in chapter 34, verse 30 on down, Jacob gets upset. Why? Because Dinah has been raped? No. Why? Because the men of Shechem have been killed? No. Because Jacob's reputation has been scarred. That's what he's upset about. He's not upset about the sin. He's upset about his reputation. Now here's the point, my friend, and listen to it very carefully. You see, Jacob was passive in dealing with the sins of his own life and the sins of his boys. He didn't mold and shape their character. His son Reuben later sleeps with the concubine Bilhah. And what the Bible says, one little simple provocative word in chapter 35, Jacob heard of it, but didn't do anything about it. Just heard of it. His brothers were jealous in chapter 37, you'll notice it. Verse 11, his brothers were jealous of Joseph, but what does it say? His father kept quiet, kept the matter in mind. Didn't deal with the jealousy of his sons. Didn't deal with the pride of Joseph, his son. He just kept it in mind. And here's my point, my friend, is that we cannot be passive about the sin in our own life, and we cannot be passive about shaping the character of our children. Do you see that? Jacob was passive. The question is, am I willing to deal with my sin? Father, mother, you willing to deal with your faults? Are you willing to say to your 8-year-old boy, I'm sorry, to him because maybe you mistreated him wrongly? Are you willing to tell him today you're sorry? Oh, maybe they'll look at you like you're strange and from outer space. Maybe they have absolutely no idea what you're talking about, but God does, and you will. You see, are you willing to stand for righteousness and seek holiness? We live in a society that just does not want to deal with their sin and are passive about life. You agree with that? And we're raising children in that atmosphere. But we can go against that tide when we model a godly character and a godly personality to deal with our own sin and to be willing to admit that we're guilty and at fault with even our children at times so that they understand the power of forgiveness and the power of humility. You see, it all goes into shaping their character and molding who they are. You see it every single day, this drive. And yet God, in His wonderful mercy, has called you and me to live in a society where by the power of God we can live out His character and His personality. Well, we come to the end this morning. We've looked at Jacob. There it is. Joseph grows up without a real mother, with brothers who hate him, and with a father who is a self-promoter and a protector and is partial and is passive. And you come to Joseph, and no wonder you see this self-promotion through the dreams. I haven't even dealt with that part of the text this morning. Didn't intend to. All I can say is, I'm telling you, if I'd have had that kind of dream, I'd have kept it myself. I wouldn't want to have been telling anybody. But he did. I believe he took some pleasure in doing it. He's a self-protector. He's given bad reports about his brothers, so he'll look good. He's partial. He learned it. Don't tell me he didn't wear that robe like he was wearing something from Polo, you know. He wore that robe. He loved it because it meant that his father loved him more, and he knew it. He learned partiality. Here's the question, and we end with this. Will we position our children for the blessing of God? Or will we position them to having to be broken by Him so that they will learn the godly character and godly personality? Oh yes, even through the breaking they'll learn. And maybe God will have to break them anyway. But let's not have Him to break them because we didn't model. the godly character and the godly personality. Just like Norman Schwarzkopf understood his calling at the time of Kuwait, may you and I understand today that because of the people, whether it be our children or just people that God has placed into our life, God, through all your experiences, through all your character problems and shaping and personality of your life, God has prepared you and me for a moment just like this, to be used by him to mold our children or people around us for godly character and a godly personality. Let's pray together. Father, we've looked at a broad view of your word. We haven't even dealt with one particular text this morning, but we've dealt with some principles. We've had to rush through some of them, but Father, you will take what is left and what is there to mold our personal lives. Lord, the good news is that you used Jacob despite his failures. The good news is that you used Joseph despite his needs. And there's people in this room right now this morning, Father, including myself, that has failed miserably as parents in these areas or just in life. But by your grace, today is the day of shaping us so that we will continue to be used by you, by your grace. Some of us in life, Father, have been products of that kind of modeling, and we have a lot of needs because of it. But the good news is, Lord, it's that you'll still use us by your grace. So, Father, take us forth today with learning the freedom to be broken before you. We thank you in the blessed name of Jesus Christ. Amen.